Hi everyone, welcome to this week's writing video where we're going to be talking about what makes a good plot. So what is a plot? In its most simple terms, a plot is all the events that happen as a part of your story. Often in school, they use this diagram to describe plot. Here, let me bring it up. So every plot has a beginning, a middle, and an end, but there's more detail to that, and this diagram shows it. Plot structure includes exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. What do all those words mean? Exposition is where you set the scene of the story. That's your introduction, where you introduce your readers to all the different characters, kind of what their world is, where they live, maybe what they do for a living. It's all the basic information that your reader needs to know. And it's kind of, the normal for your characters. After that flat line, we start with the rising action. And the rising action is when you introduce conflict. So what goes wrong in the story? Is that when your superhero character suddenly gets a call that the bank has been robbed? So that's when you start to amp up everything that could possibly be exciting in the story. All those different events, they start humming along. At the top of that peak, right about here, is the climax. So the climax is probably the most exciting moment of the story. So, in our example of the superhero and the bank robbery, that's when the bank robber and the superhero fight. Ooh. And then we have the falling action. So that's one of the last legs of your story. In the falling action, that's kind of when things get wrapped up. So maybe the bank robber gets taken to jail. And then in the resolution, which is really the ending, maybe that's when the superhero visits the bank robber in jail and they realize they have a lot more in common than they thought. Maybe they become friends. The resolution is basically the new normal. So what's changed for all of the characters since the beginning of the story? Before you get writing, it's a good idea to sit down with that diagram and plot out all the events that will take place in your story. The reason I suggest that is because sometimes when you're not sure what's going to happen next in your story, you actually stop writing. So if you've taken the time to write down all the events, you probably won't stop because you won't get stuck. The other thing is that if you come up with new ideas and new things that can happen as you're writing, you can always replace those events in your diagram. Some of you might be wondering why I went into detail about characters in my first few videos before I started talking about plot. And that's because I feel like you can put any character in any type of plot versus putting any type of plot into any type of character. That is to say that anything can happen to any character, just like anything can happen to you or me. So it's a lot easier to put a specific character into a story than the other way around. And there are 7 basic types of plot: overcoming the monster, rags to riches, the quest, voyage and return, comedy, tragedy, and rebirth. So what can happen in all those different types of plot? Overcoming the monster is a good versus evil type of story. So the superhero versus the bank robber. In a rags to riches story, the character starts with nothing and ends up with a lot. So it could be the beginning of your superhero story, before the superhero realizes they have any powers at all. In a quest story, your character will go on a long journey in their own world, and they'll learn things along the way, face adventure, all sorts of things. So it could be something like the superhero needs to find an antidote because the mayor has been poisoned. In a voyage and return story, your character will go to a world that is not their own and learn all sorts of things and then come back to their own world. So a good example of that is Alice in Wonderland. No superheroes there, but it's the perfect example. I'm going to combine comedy and tragedy because a comedy is where bad things happen to your character, but all those bad things make your audience laugh. And then a tragedy is where bad things happen to your character, but all those bad things make your audience cry. 2 sides of the same coin. And finally, we have a rebirth story. In a rebirth story, something happens to your character that just changes them and they become a better person. Maybe the rebirth story is for the bank robber. Maybe once the bank robber and the superhero become friends, the bank robber realizes that they don't want to be bad anymore. I hope that all of those tips and descriptions will make plotting out your own stories that much easier. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.